Maureen Taylor is co-chair of the Provincial Expert Advisory Group on physician-assisted dying. She's an advocate for the right to die, and she's been listening in to part of that interview by the Cardinal. She joins us now from her home in Toronto. Thanks for joining us. First
You're
of
welcome.
all, what is your reaction to what you just heard from Cardinal Collins?
I grew up as a Catholic, so I'm not surprised at his reaction at all. This is exactly what I would expect the Catholic Church to say. I'm disappointed that he keeps insisting on using language like killing, but frankly, I don't think that his views are going to have a whole lot of influence over our lawmakers up in Ottawa who have to draft legislation on this issue. And frankly, I don't think they're going to have a lot of influence even on Catholics who still attend Mass, just as his views on birth control and divorce and abortion don't seem to have a lot of influence either.
What about his thoughts specifically about assisted dying? It's not mercy, that there are other ways of helping people who are suffering.
Well, I'm very glad that his sister's death, as he said, that pain medications were able to control her suffering. I have experience with this myself. My husband died of a brain tumor about 2.5 years ago. I can assure the Cardinal that my husband was very well loved and he was very well cared for with excellent palliative care. But my husband made it very clear in the days and the months before he died that that wasn't what worried him. He knew that he would have people around him who loved him, and he knew that he wouldn't be in pain, but he did not want a prolonged, protracted death. And he wanted to be able to control the time and the speed of his death. And unfortunately, the option that will be available to Canadians after June 6th was not available to my husband.
Yeah, speaking of your husband, Dr. Donald Lowe, of course, he died in 2013. What do you think about the state of where assisted dying is now and his potential thoughts on it if he were alive to see it?
He'd be surprised because I think he was disheartened. He thought that there were a lot of physicians, his colleague physicians, who were against it. But in fact, they're not. I mean, the majority of physicians have voted at their national association that this should be an option. We don't know exactly how many physicians are going to be willing to participate after June 6th, but I have confidence that things are moving in a direction Don could not have foreseen. Canadians have wanted this for many years. The Supreme Court has said it will be our right. And I think the federal government will look to the expert advice from its own committee, as well as I hope the one that I helped to co-chair. And I think we'll come up with guidelines that we can all be very proud of, that protect the vulnerable, protect conscience rights, which seems to be the Cardinal's concern. We will protect those rights. But at the same time, we'll offer Canadians another choice at the end of their life that Don didn't have.
You know, the Cardinal says it's a slippery slope. He calls the recommendations disturbing, particularly in which they allow for people suffering from conditions like dementia, for example, to pre-schedule the date of their death. What do you think?
So our committee actually looked at that very carefully, and what we decided was that if you are diagnosed with something, I like to use dementia as an example. Right now, when you get that diagnosis, you're not suffering intolerably. Remember, that's one of the criteria. But at some point in your future, you know that you may hit that point where for you the quality of life would not be worth going on. Unfortunately, you may have lost the capacity to make a decision about assisted dying by the time you're suffering intolerably. So we're simply saying that you should be able to spell out in a legal document what for you would qualify as intolerable suffering, and then have your wishes carried out by your physician if you lose competence. Otherwise, what you're doing is asking these people to have an assisted death many months or maybe even many years before they absolutely need to. And how is that respecting life?
So you would say this is based, on a case by case, because it is hard to define, especially when you're not really sure what you're up against.
And that's why you would need the diagnosis. And some people may say, well, I won't know how I'll feel many months after my diagnosis of dementia. Well, then by all means, you should not go to your lawyer and fill out this document that I'm talking about. But for those of us who've given it a lot of thought, I mean, I work in a hospital with people with dementia, I've made up my mind about how I would want to live with dementia and for what for me would qualify as intolerable suffering. I'm just asking the rest of you to let me have that choice. That's what Canadians have said over and over that they want. We're not talking about wholesale pushing people with dementia into this. It has to be your choice when you have the capacity to make the choice.
You say you're not surprised by the church's stance, but what effect do you anticipate Cardinal Collins' public statements will have on public opinion?
I think none. He's certainly got the media talking, but I actually think there'll be very little influence over our federal government. Justin Trudeau is somebody who's already said very clearly that he respects decisions by the Supreme Court, especially when it comes to charter rights. He's going to respect this decision, the Carter decision. And so I'm afraid that it's fine for the Cardinal to talk to his parishioners about this issue, and they're free to voice their concerns to their members of Parliament. But at the end of the day, the law is coming into effect on June 6th, and the federal government will have legislation in place by then.